And also had a master's degree in computer science and engineering. So I go out and design computer software for numbers of companies and that type of thing. So I enjoy it. Seems we have a echo for some reason. He's working on it. Boy, he's slaving away up there. There he goes. So, as I said, from Answers in Genesis, and Answers in Genesis, we have a 70,000 square foot creation museum. It's a beautiful museum on a really large campus, and we have things there such as animatronic dinosaurs and Stargazer's planetarium. And we also have a special effects theater just like they have the Universal Studios, except we tell the truth, which is different. Kind of refreshing, isn't it, to tell the truth. Have an Adam and Eve display, a Noah's Ark construction site there in the museum, and they also have animatronic Methuselah. You can actually ask this character questions and he'll answer you. And a dinosaur den and nature trails. We also have a petting zoo, and one of the two creatures that we had there a while back are the Zorse. Now, remember how it tells us in Genesis 1 that God created everything according to its kind? So we put that to the test. Show people that what God says he means, and what he means he says. And a Zorse is a cross between a zebra stallion and a domestic mare. So what does that say about zebras and horses? They belong to what? The same kind. Isn't it interesting? Here's one too. It's a zonkey. It's a cross between a zebra stallion and a donkey Jeanette. Isn't it interesting? Aren't they cute? They're a lot bigger now, but we wanted to show that zebras belong to the horse family. So when you ever get out to Africa, you can set up one of those guys, and you can have a good time. We're also building a full-size Noah's Ark, which is going to be one of the biggest and tallest timber structures in the United States. It's going to be a theme park surrounding that too. So we hopefully may be able to have the Noah's Ark completed maybe by the end of summer next year, but keep in tabs, go back to the answersingenesis.org website and you can check it out. Now, one thing I did forget to tell everybody about this morning, and I wanted to save you guys from further headache, okay? Notice I'm Italian with my name, and Italian families stick close together. And I have this cousin Guido, okay? And cousin Guido takes care of me. When I go out, he keeps tabs on how people are treating me. You're doing all right so far, but I haven't seen as much clapping and standing and all that kind of stuff as I should. And he keeps track of this stuff. And people say, yeah, cousin Guido, you don't know cousin Guido. So I was in one of these things and he came to visit. And I said, oh, how cousin Guido? And they looked back and he was sitting in the back. After that, everybody clapped, stood at attention, didn't fall asleep anymore. They were really good. So bear that in mind about my cousin Guido. So today we're talking about evolution. Is it fact or is it fiction? This is kind of a Bible and science presentation that I give to show that what we read in the Bible, in God's Word, we should see in God's world. And we should never go the other way around, go from the world to the Bible. We always go from the Bible to the world. So, anybody ever hear of this character here, Ben Stein? He wrote a book called Expel, or DVD, and it's very interesting what he says, but this is one of the little film clips that he has in there.
Excuse me?
Yes.
How did life begin in the first place?
This is what we have the same question every time.
You never answered.
It's a very tough. You know, we've been so many times we have
Could you have been an intelligent designer?
Could there have been an intelligent designer? Well, I do believe there's an intelligent designer, and he's called God. And you have to be very careful when people use the word intelligent designer, because sometimes they mean any kind of intelligent designer, including aliens, which I'm going to talk about here in just a little bit too. So, I told you earlier today that there's a big problem that people in the church have because they feel they have to stick man's science into the Bible somewhere. And I told you there's really two kinds of sciences. Science means knowledge, but there's two kinds of sciences. And they confuse them and try to merge them together, and you can't do that. There's observational science, which I tell you is that we use observational science in the laboratory to do experiments and confirm things. Like if we wanted to design a new computer system, we could go into a laboratory, into a computer design scenario, and we can design a computer system. We can design the circuitry and all that and come up with a revolutionary system. And that's observational science. And as I told you, all people, believers and unbelievers or whatever, they do observational science exactly the same way. I write computer software using the same tools and the same language that an unbeliever friend of mine does when he writes computer programs. No difference. We can agree on all that. We can agree on how to do that kind of stuff, okay? And that's how we build space shuttles, and how we get medicines, and how we build computer systems, and how we create DVDs and that type of thing. But the other kind of science that people don't realize is called historical science, and it's the study of things that happened in the past, whether it was 1 hour ago or 1,000 years ago or whatever. In order to do historical science, you got to rely on what? Evidence that from the past, and you have to rely on eyewitnesses. In fact, that's how our court systems operate, on historical science. In order to convict somebody of a crime, you weren't there, so what do you have to do? You got to have evidence and witnesses to do it. So there's two types of sciences. Don't put them together because they're not the same. And the way I do historical science can be completely different than my friend who's an unbeliever who does historical science, especially when it comes to the past history of how the universe came into existence. So the issue really is not operational science. We all have the same facts, the same stars, the same fossils, okay? The same science, the same chemicals, all that. We also use the same type of science. I can do computer science and biology and geology the same as an unbeliever, the same way of examining a rock and determining how much carbon, radiocarbon is in that rock. We all do it the same. So how come, if we do science the same, how come we come with different ideas of what happened in the past? Where they believe evolution is how people came into existence, or versus God, who I say created everything in 6 normal days. Well, there is a difference between operational science and historical science, and it's the interpretation of the evidence. The historical science is in question because it's all opinion. Okay, it's interpretation. You know, when Sir Hillary was on the first team that climbed the top of Mount Everest, when he got near the top of Mount Everest, do you know what he found? A lot of fossilized clamshells, up at around 26,000 to 29,000 feet. Now, if I look at those fossilized clamshells, and he asked, well, how did they get here? I said, well, they were deposited by the flood. If my evolutionary friend would say, no, it evolved over 100 millions of years, were buried over settlements, sediments, and all this stuff built up over a long period of time. We're looking at the same clamshell, we come up with two different ideas. Those are called worldviews. Your worldview is your starting point. When you look at something, how do you evaluate it? It goes through your worldview, your starting point, your bias. It's like putting on evolutionary glasses. If you're an evolutionist, you put on your evolutionary glasses and everything you see is a result of evolution. That's how you look at it. Big Bang, right? Well, I put on my biblical glasses and everything I look at it through a biblical standpoint. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So that's why we come up with different interpretations, because our worldview changes everything. So, I guess the best way to do it is try which worldview provides the answers. Which is the best worldview to believe in? Well, how about evolution? Does it provide the answers? You know, I told you here that they know, they have their story straight in evolution, that the Big Bang happened about 15 years ago, and then the stars came into existence about 10 billion years, and then the sun came into existence 5 billion years, and the earth started out as a molten rock that slowly cooled down, and the oceans came into existence. And they know all that, as I told you, because they have all those digital photographs, right? They don't have those things. How do they know? It's based on opinion. There's no evidence for that. It's all based on opinion. The Big Bang, they say, happened 13 to 15 billion years ago. An explosion occurred, so to speak, and everything was pushed out from a entity the size of a pinhead, and everything you see in this universe came from that pinhead expansion. That's what they believe. Now I have a question. Where did all the matter, where did all the planets and the galaxies and the stars, where did all the energy that we have in the universe, how about the laws of nature, the laws of science, the laws of information come from that was created in that fireball? You know, personally, my own pet name for the Big Bang, I call it the pinhead theory, because they say everything came from a pinhead. So, you know, that's just my thing, but you have to say, where did all that matter? In fact, I like to ask them sometimes, where did the pinhead come from? You see what I mean? You're just transposing something further back, and the further back you go, you keep finding something else you got to go to. And then they believe that this Big Bang, you know, all created, evolved up until we got the Earth, and then the Earth evolved, and they have all these geologic columns, which has all these layers that they say the most simplest organisms are down at the bottom, and as you go up, you become more complex organisms, because that's how evolution happened over hundreds of millions of years, and all the beginning stuff is at the bottom, and it built up all those layers over those hundreds of millions of years, and that's how they explain that geologic column. The problem is, I can build that same column with flood deposits. You know, all the stuff that got buried first was all the simple stuff, and as it goes up, the stuff that was able to get away and lived on land, they were the last ones to get buried. Hey, I'm looking at the same evidence coming up with a whole totally different explanation, because I'm looking at it from my biblical worldview. And when I talk about evolution, I'm talking about macroevolution, where one kind of creature actually turns into another kind of creature, where a fish will turn into an amphibian like a frog. When you look at the biology and geology and science textbooks that they use in our school, they always seem to push the billions of years. Whether it's 15 billion years or 8 billion years, and the Big Bang, this is one from Prentice Hall Science in 1992, and in the biology books at that time, they said you are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. That's what they're teaching in the schools today. In fact, they teach that this small mammal here was your grandpa. Does your grandpa look like that? You don't look like that, huh? Well, how about this? This is when he was older. He still looks like that? Okay. But you know, when you look at the textbooks and the pictures they use in school, how many of you ever seen this sequence? The evolution of man, you know what I call that? Artwork. It's artwork. There's no known sequence of man's fossils like that anywhere in the world. But it looks good, doesn't it? Because it has to look good. That's what they want to present to your young, impressionable children, that that's a good sequence, and that's what they find. They've never found that. In fact, they find very few specimens of fossilized human beings. But they've never found that sequence. I know that for a fact. So we talk about evolution. One kind of animal turns into a different kind of animal. Now, that's a very simple saying, but that's the most complex thing I know of in the world. Okay? In order to turn a creature from one kind of creature into another, you got to add something very important that I told you this morning was non-material. What was that? Information. You got to add information to the gene in order to do that. Did you know that a 747 has over 6 million parts, including the rivets? Did you also know that not one of them fly? Should that bother you when you get in an airplane? Not one of them fly. Now, what makes a 747 fly? Do you think an evolutionist dumps all 6 million parts at the end of the runway and waits? No. What do you got to do? You got to put all the parts together in the correct sequence, in the correct way, which requires what? Information. It's like building a house, and then it'll fly. Do you see why information is one of the most important things in the world? You know, another thing is, I talk about complexity. And people say, well, what do you mean by complexity? How many of you have ever killed or swatted a gnat? I want to see every hand go up, okay? Was it easy? Piece of cake, right? No problem. You had problems? I could understand that.
It went that way, and then I went up.
Oh,
and it
okay.
went down.
So, not too hard to swat and kill a gnat, right? Did you ever try to make one? You see what I mean? That's what I mean by complexity. People don't understand how complex life is. I mean, if you took a frog and put it in a blender, don't ever do that, okay? But if you did, and you were done with the process, would all the frogs still be there? Yeah, they'll all be there. Every part would be there, right? But what's wrong with that? It doesn't work. Something's missing. See what I mean? Complexity, folks. And that's what I mean. We talk about the DNA. The DNA is the most complicated computer program and database I have ever seen. That's what the DNA is. It's like a computer and a database, and when it wants to build a pineapple, it cranks out the information that's needed to build a pineapple. If it wants to build a human being, it cranks out the information to build a human being. It's a computer program, folks, and it's the most complicated one I have ever seen. Where did all the information for the DNA come from? Because as a computer science, information doesn't come into being on its own by itself out of nothing. It's got to be designed. That's how you get information. And then we have something else called the law of biogenesis. And all scientists know this. We've never seen life come from non-life. The only place we see life originate is from life. That's the law of biogenesis. But they're saying that through evolution, life came from non-life, i.e. hydrogen gas, rocks, those type of things. So if you want to build an amoeba, you don't need very much information, though building an amoeba is the most complex thing I could imagine because we still can't do it today. We can't even build a one-cell animal today. We can't do it. But if you want to turn that into a horse, you've got to add a lot of information to the DNA molecule to do that. So, how do evolutionary scientists say they do that? How can that happen? Well, they say there's two things that can add information to the DNA. One is mutations, and another is natural selection. Well, I'm here to tell you that both of those processes do not add information to the DNA. They really remove information from the DNA. Mutations. You know what mutations are? How many of you have had your computer crash? Okay? I've had computer crashes so many times in my life, if I had $1 for every one, I'd be a super millionaire. I mean, that's a mutation. It's a error in the program. That's what a mutation is. If you have a pair of dogs with long legs and they have a puppy, and during that process there's some kind of copying error, okay, and that puppy loses the gene for long legs, it only ends up with short legs. Has it gained information or lost information? It's lost information. That's what it is. And you know what? They've tried to use mutations on fruit flies. Fruit flies have a very short time life. So you can have millions of generations in a very short time, and they tried everything they could to try to mutate a fruit fly and come up with added information. You know what they got in the end? Fruit fly. All right? Some had no wings, some had no legs, some had no antennas, but they were still fruit flies. Didn't change anything. They couldn't make them mutate by adding information. In fact, this is an example of a mutation. Okay, this is a loss of information. It's really two turtles in one body, like Siamese twins, so to speak. But that's what they are. But these kind of things don't survive very long in the wild for obvious reasons. And a scientist said all point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level, which is pretty low, turn out to reduce the genetic information and not increase it. You see, mutations are a genetic burden. They're the origin of disease and birth defects, but they are not the origin of the species. Now this morning I talked about Professor Dawkins. Professor Dawkins is one of the leading evolutionists in the world. And this guy just drives me up a wall. I want to show you some of the things that this leading evolutionist says, and you just won't believe it. Okay? He's going to talk about aliens too. But this is the leading evolutionist in the world. And we asked him, Dr. Dawkins, do you know of any process that can add information to the genome, to the gene? And you know what? I was surprised he actually gave the right answer.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation-born evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in your genome?
He gave the right answer. You know, they said, hey, mutations are one of the prime examples of adding information to the genome, and he couldn't come up with one. So mutations we observe are not the ones that we need. So what about natural selection? Mutations aren't going to cut it. Well, natural selection, you can call it survival of the fittest. Now, I believe in natural selection, but natural selection doesn't add information to the genes. It actually reduces it. If you have 3 dogs caught in the Sahara Desert, one with short hair, one with medium length hair, and one with long length hair, which one do you think would have a better chance of surviving? Right? The ones with the shorter hair. So, after a while in the desert, the other 2 are goners, and the only one left is the one with short hair. So, when these dogs mate, who or what type of dogs are they going to meet in a desert? They all have short hair. What kind of puppy you think they're going to have? Short hair. Don't say long hair. They're going to have short hair. They've lost information. Genetic information is lost. When you take a dog and something happens in the birth process between fertilization and the birth process, and you lose something in there because the information got lost because the parent no longer has that information. For example, and this one was short hair. That's all you're going to get is short hair puppies. And you say, well, I believe myself that the kind of dog that was on Noah's Ark was probably a wolf-like creature, because we find that wolf-like creatures even today have a much better genetic heritage and have more good genes left in them than all the domestic dogs that we have bred down in a long time. So you could actually take a wolf and over a long period of time end up with a Chihuahua. And I'm going to tell you that Chihuahuas have lost a lot of information. Now, I don't want to have any nasty emails from Chihuahua owners. I'm just making a statement of fact. So, in order for survival of the fittest to work, okay, natural selection, the trait has got to be there before it can be selected. If it's not there, it can't be selected. It's just simple. So yeah, I believe in natural selection because that does happen, but it doesn't add information to the genome. It doesn't work for evolution. So the 2 main driving things that scientists say that cause information to be added to the genome, I could prove that it doesn't work. It actually reduces information. And after I say that, people say, yeah, but I still believe in evolution because I believe in cavemen. Well, what are cavemen? Men who live where? In caves. That's it. Now, this guy lived in a cave. You'd call him a beginning of the species. You know, he doesn't live in there anymore. But just because you live in a cave doesn't mean that you evolved from a cave. Remember, you ever hear the word Nebraska man? Now, when I was growing up, and I was going through junior high school and all that, they taught me the Nebraska man was the missing link to human beings. You ever hear the Scopes monkey trial? Okay, the Scopes monkey, you're so young, it's pathetic. You know? In the Scopes monkey trial, evolution was actually on trial because creation was taught in the schools during that time, and this one teacher wanted to decide he was going to teach evolution. And William Jennings Bryant, you know, was the lawyer for the creation in the schools. And Nebraska Man, they said they was a missing link for man, and they actually based it on one thing. At that time, in all the newspapers and magazines and all that, they drew all these pictures of Nebraska Man during the trial, and it was all based on one thing. This tooth that they found. Based on that tooth, they got all these neat drawings. Okay, I call that artwork. So, after the trial, I think it was like 20 years later, people decided they were going to try to find out the rest of Nebraska Man, where all the rest was. Well, actually, the scientists actually came up and found out that that tooth actually belonged to an extinct pig. That's what it belonged to. Yes. And the same thing with Neanderthals. I was taught that Neanderthals was another missing link for human beings. And if you went to any of the museums at that time, you know, they showed Neanderthals as the missing link for human beings. But a number of years ago, I went to the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., and they have a whole room for Neanderthals, and they call Neanderthals fully human beings now, because they found that not only did they have music, but they also buried their dead. So they're considered now by scientists to be fully human, even though on all the museums and all the science teaching, Neanderthals was the missing link. How many of you ever heard this change? No? So it's happened. It happened, but they all said Neanderthals was the missing link. And then people said, well, it was Lucy. You know, Don Johansen found a skeleton of this creature. He only found 40% of the skeleton, and he said this Lucy, which is supposed to be about 4 million years old, was a missing link to human beings because she stood upright and walked like a human being. Well, the problem is they only found 40% of the skeleton and they didn't find the other 60%, which had the important parts to prove that. Now later on they said they did, but it still didn't make a difference because a whole number of scientists now believe that Lucy was not the missing link. In fact, in the Museum of Natural History in Denver, they have this flesh-modeled picture of Lucy. You can see it has kind of a human-like face and eyes, and trying to show people. I actually stood there with people. I watched, they see the Lucy exhibit, and they see these bones, and they see this picture, says, oh yeah, that's the missing link. Sure looks like she's becoming human. Drives me right up the wall. I have to do this when I'm standing over there. But the worst thing I've ever seen a scientist do was what I saw on PBS. This guy wanted so bad to prove that Lucy was a missing link. You will not believe what he did. And he actually did this on PBS.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he would restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job.
I can imagine.
After taking the kink out of the pellets, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
You know, our hip bones, excuse me, and chimps' hip bones are completely different. Theirs flare out more. So when he got a copy of Lucy's hips, they flared out just like a chimp's. He said, well, I'll fix that. And that's what he did. He fixed it all right. This is how far they'll go to prove that evolution is true. Most scientists now say that Lucy is not the missing link to humans, that she was actually a chimp, extinct chimp. So she was an extinct chimp or ape is more probably the better word to say that. So I don't see evolution providing the answers at all. But when I look at creation, because you know I was an unbeliever at one time. I was a scientist and an unbeliever. And when I finally got into reading the scriptures, I changed my mind and heart through the Lord Jesus Christ. And I believe that creation provides the answers because I believe the Bible is the history book of the universe. You know, when I check it out, what I read in God's Word, I can look out in the world and I can see that in God's world. You know, the Bible says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That first sentence, it creates the space-time continuum, meaning we have space, time, and matter. And in Genesis 1:21, God says, for example, He created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their what? Their kind. So one proof of creation, so to speak, would be, do animals ever cross the kind barrier? Now in evolution, they have to cross the kind barrier, right? A fish has to turn from fish kind into amphibian kind, so it has to do it, but God says no, that does not work. For example, dogs. How many here know what a dog is? Nobody raises their hand. You got a strange congregation, Pastor. Well, dogs, there's about 250 different kind of species of dogs. And when I talk about species, I mean the way they look. All right, we have everything from big, giant dogs to little pipsqueak dogs. But they're all dogs. I never seen dogs turn into cats, do you? Or into pigs. If they did, there'd be a lot of farmers raising dogs around here. They don't do it. So, when you make dogs, what do you always get? Dogs. When you make cats, what do you always get? Cats. Very interesting. Did you know that these little house cats are related to lions and tigers? Not bears, though. Just lions and tigers. In fact, my wife called her little cat her house tiger. If you look at cats, these cats here, the big ones, and you watch them in a zoo and watch their mannerisms, when you look at a house cat, you see the same mannerisms. They all belong to the same kind, and I've never seen a cat evolve or change into anything else, and neither has anybody else, ever. When you have chimpanzees, what do you always produce? Chimpanzees. And what do horses produce? Horses. Remember I told you, though, that zebras belong to the horse family because they can have offspring with horses. So they belong to the horse family, or you could say the horses belong to the zebra family. They're all one kind. So what's interesting, when I look out into the world, God says everything stays within its kind. That is all we see. We do not see one kind change into another. Yes?
If y'all try to bring back the marble, you know what the marble is?
No.
It was a primitive zebra. It had stripes on its hindquarters.
Yes.
Forequarters were more solid, dun color.
Well, they've tried a lot of things. Whether it can bring back animals that are extinct, I doubt that today, although they try a lot. When you have humans, what do you always get? Human beings, that's it. Do you know there's only one race in the world? What is that race? The human race. That's all there is. The Bible never talks about race. It talks about tribes, but never talks about, in nations, it doesn't talk about race at all. Because God says in Acts 17, there's only one race. Okay? All one blood, as He puts it. So, do animals change? Yeah. One kind of animal can change its outward appearance. Here you have a Chinese crested dog, and there you have a mastiff. Now, are those dogs? Yeah. Do they look the same? No. Do all these look different? Yeah. Were they all dogs? Absolutely. What about these two? Okay, you have a Great Dane and a Chihuahua again. Now, according to what I see, you can take a Great Dane and over a long period of time and lots of work, you can make yourself a Chihuahua, so to speak. You can't go the other way. You know why? Because there's a lot of traits, a lot of genes missing in the Chihuahua that are in the Great Dane. So you can't take one kind of dog and breed into another if the stuff's not there. If the gene's not there for it, it's not going to work. It's simple. It's a simple computer program. If you understand computers, they only do one thing. They take the information, do the work. That's it. What about these? Now, I think these are some kind of degenerate mutants. I'm not really sure, but they're what?
They're both poodles.
They're poodles?
Yes, they're both poodles.
Oh, thanks for letting me know that.
One's colored and the other one's just weird.
One's colored, one's weird. I like that. They dyed his hair. So, in the DNA, how do we get different kind of looking dogs? Well, all you do, guess what breeding does? Who breeds something here? When you breed something, what are you actually doing? You're taking the traits of two different things and try to come out with something else, right? But you only can take what's in those two things and do it. So you take the information in the DNA, and actually when you do breeding, you're removing information from the kind, or you're rearranging the information a little bit. You're never adding the information. You cannot add, nobody knows how to add information to the DNA, even in the laboratory. So, when you look at human beings, when you see different colors like you do, it depends on how much melanin you have in your skin. That's all it is. The more melanin you have, the darker you are, and the less you have, the lighter you are. Little melanin makes light skin, and a lot of melanin makes darker skin, and all kinds of like red and yellow and those type of things, and brown. So, if you ever went to high school and studied biology, you ever remember the big A, little B stuff? All right? That's based on the genes, and that's how they figure out if your mother has blue eyes and your father has brown eyes, what's the chances of you coming up with one of those two colors or something else? That's all it is. It's pure biology, folks. I have a friend, Dr. Gary Parker. His famous saying is, what you read in God's Word, you should find in God's world. Now, he's a paleontologist. That means he studies old stuff. And he loves old stuff. And he told me one time that since he's a paleontologist, the older his wife gets, the better she looks. So, what do you expect from a paleontologist? But there's Gary Parker on the left, and that's all the people in his immediate family. His sons, and his grandsons, and his granddaughters, and his great-grandsons, and his great-granddaughters. Look at the difference in all their color. Okay, he's part Cherokee. He's got a little bit of Cherokee in him. And so that's where all his family comes from. So you imagine that? It's all based on the big A, little b thing. Big A, big B, little b, and all that. So here are twin sisters, for example, Cheryl and Karen, and grandfather is black and their mother is white, and they're twin sisters. Here's another one, Ryan and Leo. Okay, black and white children. Here's Alika and Jasmine. Same thing, from the same mother and father. So, does creation provide the answers? I believe when I look in God, reading God's Word, I look in God's world, and that's exactly what I see. And it explains, the Bible explains why there are different nations and different tribes and different colors of people. It gives all these answers, and it says that nothing can cross the kind barrier, and that's exactly what we see in the world. Evolution can't explain how one kind can turn into another, because it doesn't work for all the information that I see. But people say, yeah, but, you know, I learned in school about missing links, and those are the source of one kind of creature turning into another. Well, what do you think they call them missing links? Why they call them missing links? Because they're still missing. That's why I call them missing links. Okay, a missing link is the creature that's in transition from one kind of creature, a fish, to another kind of creature, which is amphibian. It's that middle guys. All right, those are the missing links. Well, the reason they call them missing links is because they can't find them. When you look at fish, they find billions of fish all buried together in one place. They also find in the fossil record that there's no predecessors or missing links of fish. And you ask any biologist and ask them what are the missing links or fish, they say we don't know because they can't find them. There's none. Now, there was a guy named Dr. Colin Patterson. He was the senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History. And being an evolutionist, he wrote a book called what? Evolution. Now, that's a pretty good name for a book written by an evolutionist. And when he wrote this book, somebody wrote back to him and said, hey, Dr. Patterson, in your book, Evolution, you don't give any examples, living or dead, of missing links. And guess what this leading evolutionist said? He says, I fully agree with your comments about the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. That's code word for missing links, okay? If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line. There's not one such fossil for which one can make a watertight argument. Here is a leading evolutionist who everything he believes in life is based on evolution of one kind of thing turning into another, and he can't even find one that he can make a watertight argument for. What does that tell you? Evolution's in a lot of trouble, folks. And you know what? Scientists are really starting to believe this. See, if there was missing links, we'd have things like this. A catrilla or a tiger bunny, right? So, how about a sparrow boxer? Like that one? How about a humiosaurus? Now, here's one I know all you guys would really like. A bird dog. Okay? You should find this kind of stuff, or at least find it in the fossil record. But we don't find it, so it's hard for them to show how one kind of creature turns into another kind of creature. But then they say, well, there's other evidence for evolution because there are things in the world that show how old the Earth really is, and they use radioactive decay dating as one of them. Well, radiometric decay is when a radioactive rock, such as uranium, will decay into simpler things. It goes all the way from uranium to lead, and they say it takes billions of years to do that. And I'm glad they know that because they must have been around and measured all that time. But radioactive decay is like a sand clock, one of those hourglasses, If you take an hourglass and all the sand's in the bottom and you turn it over, you can calculate, the rate of flow through that little hole and how long it takes for the sand to go from the bottom to the top. And that's what radioactive decay is measured on. How much radioactivity you have in the top, so to speak. The hole represents the radioactive decay rate, whatever that is. And then how long it takes to get to the bottom, you can figure out, what's the half-life. They call it the half-life. How long does it take for half of the material to disappear? I told you the half-life of radiocarbon is only 5,700 years. There are some half-lives of like radon, which are measured in seconds. So it all depends what you're talking about. So radiometric and radiocarbon dating actually measure the amount of radioactivity in an object, and guess what they do with that? They infer an age. How many of you know how to radio date rocks? You ever hear of a person named Madame Curie? Yeah, she was a pretty neat lady. 100 and some years ago, she discovered radiometric decay and that type of thing. Well, that's only been 100 and some years, so they've been able to observe radioactive decay only for a very short period of time. So they're making great assumptions when they say that, uranium will decay into lead in some 4 billion years or whatever it is. Were they around all that time to measure that? Yes. They were. No wonder you're so young. So, are there any assumptions used in radiometric dating? Yes, at least 3. Assumption 1, how much uranium, pure uranium or not pure, did you have when you started out with, for example? You have to know exactly, was it 100% or 50% or whatever. You say, well, how do they date rocks? Well, we're talking about rocks that come out of volcanoes. And volcanoes, you know, all that stuff is melted together and it throws all that stuff out. Even Mount St. Helens threw out a lot of radioactive type elements. And you can assume that it was 100%. And then the second assumption is the decay rate. It decays so much every year. And if you know how much you started with and how much it decayed, then you can figure out what the age is. But you have to assume the sample was always in an enclosed environment, meaning that the thing started out at 100% and nothing interfered. Because you know water, if it runs through this stuff, it takes some of it away. Some of that stuff dissolves in water, is carried away. So there's a lot of assumptions, and you all know what assumptions mean, don't you? What assume means? And that's all it is. You know, I believe that most scientists don't believe in radiometric dating. But they know they have to espouse it. Why? Because if they can't find anything that shows the Earth is billions of years old, evolution's in serious problems. So, I guess the best way to test radiometric dating is to date stuff that we know that are radioactive and we know how old they are. Isn't that a good idea? So, we looked at the Sunset Crater in northern Arizona. It's a volcanic cylinder located north of Flagstaff. And we believe that thing exploded in about 1065 AD, and when they dated it using potassium argon dating, it dated at 200,000 years old. So they know how old this thing is, but it dates 200,000 years, so that's a little problem. And Walalai volcano in Hawaii, potassium argon dated at 1.4 to 22 million years. We know it blew up in 1801 because people were there. But when they take the rocks from that volcano, it dates up to 22 million years. So there's a problem there, folks. And what about the lava cone at Mount St. Helens? How old is the lava dome? Well, we know how old it is because I was flying over that area, and it was 30 years ago or so. All right, 35 years. So we know how old it is, but when they dated it, using radiometric dating, it dated at 2.4 million years. So when you take dates that you know how old something is, and then you date it using radiometric dating, and the dates are so far off, they're pathetic, then how can you trust that system to date something you don't know how old it is? See what I mean? Radiocarbon has the same problem. I'm telling you that it has a half-life of 5,700 years, which means every 5,700 years, half of it disappears. And if you had the entire Earth made of radiocarbon, in 100,000 years, there wouldn't be one atom left. But yet we find good amounts of radiocarbon in diamonds, which are supposed to be billions of years old. They also find radiocarbon in natural gas, in crude oil, which it shouldn't be there, because those are supposed to take millions of years, at least, to come into existence. So none of that stuff coincides with evolution. But I'm telling you, one of the most important things that I believe is the evolutionary killer is information. Anybody know what this is? Don't look at it.
Bird. A one-legged bird.
One-legged bird? It's called a what?
Golden plover.
Golden plover. Anybody know about golden plovers? They're one of those creatures that migrate, all right? This one's is fantastic. These creatures live up here in Alaska, and every year when it gets cold, they migrate to Hawaii. Okay, pretty neat. That distance is about 2,700 miles or so, and they fly it in 88 hours, non-stop.
Wow.
All right, isn't that interesting? Here's a bird that lives up here in Alaska. They know, now I've flown from Alaska down that way, and I need INS navigation, inertial navigation systems. And I know I have to carry the right amount of fuel because sometimes the headwinds up in this area are about 200 miles an hour plus. All right, so these birds could never make it. If they fly at 50 miles an hour, they flew into a 200 mile an hour headwind, they end up 150 miles behind them every hour. All right? I used to have fun like that. I used to go and fly over the cities where I lived, And I'd fly in this airplane that I could go 40 miles an hour, and I'd be flying at an 80-mile headwind, and people would look up and they'd see the airplane flying backwards. So they know not only how to get there, but they know when to leave because they build up enough fuel, which is their body weight, and they know when to go. Pretty smart for birds. You say, well, they figured that out. Well, how did the first ones ever do it? You know, they didn't know anything. But you know even more fantastic? You know what that is? That's a baby golden plover. And 1 month after the parents leave, they leave, and they know all that stuff too. How do they know? How do it know? Yeah, instinct. They have all that information someplace. And I don't think it's in their head. I don't think it's contained in their bodies or in their heart, their brain, because the brain is just a medium like a CD, okay? You know, our thoughts and our emotions and our information comes from something higher order. And I believe that their information is contained somewhere else. I have my own theories of where it is. But these guys know how to do it. And so do hummingbirds. Hummingbirds come back. I see the same hummingbirds come back to my same nest every year. You know, and moths do that, and butterflies, and a whole bunch of creatures do it. How do they know? Man can't explain the information. And I believe information is the evolutionary killer. But you know, a lot of scientists see the same thing, evolutionary scientists, and they're starting to come up with excuses. About 10 or 15 years ago, I began teaching this and saying that one day they're going to start finding this excuse of how man came into existence because they see that evolution, all the evidence is not working out for them. Remember Dr. Dawkins? Okay? Well, let's see what the new theory on how man arrived on the scene. Here is Ben Stein interviewing Dr. Dawkins, and he's asking, Dr. Dawkins, is it possible for another way or a way that man could have came into being on the earth? Listen to what this guy says.
It seems a possibility that the intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues of genetics or evolution.
We could clarify it in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of development to a very, very high level of technology and designed the form of life that they see on this planet.
What's he talking about? Alien seeding from the leading evolutionists in the world. And notice what he said, in order for that to happen, they had to be intelligent. Okay? So there has to be some kind of intelligent race somewhere else that had to come into being through natural processes like evolution. Okay?
That is a possibility in true possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence of that if you look at the details of our chemistry or the biology. You might find a signature of some sort of design.
He's saying that somewhere in our molecular makeup, in our chemistry, that if that was true, we would find some kind of signature of an intelligent creator. What have I talked about is the most obvious signature that all creatures, you know, have. There be a signature that they were designed. The what? The DNA molecule. That's what he's talking about. That would be a signature, isn't it? That we were intelligently designed. That's what he's saying. But he's saying it's an alien race that did it. But this is really something. Listen to this.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that design could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have had to come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. We couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So, Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God. So the Hebrew God doesn't, he doesn't exist in the
certainly, I mean, very unpleasant prospect.
And the terminology can be
Nothing like that.
He said if the God of the Bible existed, that'd be a very unpleasant prospect. Would it be an unpleasant prospect? If the God of the Bible really existed? Remember I told you in Romans 1 that all men and women know that who the real God is? You know, when they say stuff like that, they know, but they're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. So he says that's a very good prospect that we were alien seeded from another intelligence in the universe. Well, what would be the question if he says that we were alien seeded? What should be the one question you would ask Dr. Dawkins? Yeah, where did the alien race come from? See what I mean? You're just pushing it off to another planet is all you're doing, so to speak. So where did they come from? And where did they come from that they came from? And where did they come from that they came from that they come from? Doesn't answer the question. Okay? So, the Bible tells us differently than what men say. Men say that because of millions of years in evolution and death, man came into existence. But God says, because of what man did thousands of years ago, death came into existence. Totally opposite views. Only one can be right, folks. Somebody is not telling the truth. They both can't be right. That's why you can't have theistic evolution. And that's why we have death in the world. That's why we have things like 9/11, which the anniversary was just a few days ago. And that's why we have hurricanes and tornadoes and those type of things. And that's why we see evil men and evil women doing evil things. You know, Romans 5:12 says, whereby sin came into the world through one man, and death by sin, so death passed to all men for all have sinned. Folks, that's why you can't have theistic evolution. Because death came into the world from what? The sin of Adam. You can't have evolution before death. And there was no death in the world before the sin of Adam. That states it right here. It also states it in Romans 8 where it says, that's why all things are coming unglued. Okay, that's why everything is running down because of what the sin of Adam did. And when he says because the sin came in through one man, who's he talking about? Adam. That's it. Adam was the fertile head of the human race. And because of what he did, that's why we all die. God cursed Adam and he cursed the universe. God tells us also that in 1 Corinthians 15:26, he says the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Guess what God calls death? He calls it an enemy. It's an intruder into the world because the wages of sin are what? Death. So folks, there was no death before the sin of Adam and Eve. Therefore, all seminaries that teach theistic evolution and all people who believe in theistic evolution are absolutely wrong biblically because biblically it can't happen. Because there was no death in the world before the sin of Adam. Now I asked Dr. Hugh Ross, which is an astronomer, and he states that he is a Christian, and he believes in stellar evolution and geological evolution and all that. I asked him face to face, I says, do you believe that the animals tore each other apart and ate each other for hundreds of millions of years before Adam? He said, yes. Can't be. Romans 5:12 says no way. So, it all belongs to whether you believe in God's word or man's word. The real battle is over the same evidence. It's just how we interpret those evidence. You say, well, why are people doing that today? Well, 2 Timothy 4, verses 3 and 4 answers that question. It says, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned under fables. People love fables, especially when they can use it to run away from God. So evolution is not a fact, folks, either scientifically or biblically. Therefore, our thinking should always be with the Scriptures. Always go from the Bible to the world, and you will never be wrong. But if you go from the world and try to stick the world into the Bible, you're going to have a lot of problems. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Amen? Amen. So I brought all those books back here. I want to see those things go, especially those answer books, because those are going to really help you. You think this stuff is hard. It's not hard. Those answer books answer every one of these questions I've been talking about. You know, get a set of those because you'll use them at some time. Believe me, I see in the next year or less that there are going to be some really nasty things happening in this country. Can we get away with murdering 1 million babies a year? Can we get away with endorsing homosexuality and same-sex marriage and not have God get upset about that? You know, I think we're already under judgment. And I think sooner or later that judgment is going to come to fruition. Thank you, folks. Catch you in a bit.
We'll take about a 10-minute break.